Hi, thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. I'm going to continue on with the points of finding the silver lining with explanations by me, Susan MeeLing. I've been known by a few names: Reverend MeeLing, Reverend Susan MeeLing, Lady Dori, Belle, so on and so forth. So, picking up with this page, and then going into this page. Okay, so, in reference to my Aunt Edith on my biological mother's side of the family, I think she is the middle child, if I'm not mistaken, in regards to the five of them, and as far as like my biological mother's side of her and her siblings. And whatchamacallit, she had married a guy that was her second marriage, and whatchamacallit, she had she had an understanding that my biological mother did not. My biological mother had this, probably still does, this like, everything is perfect and there's no problems anywhere, and if you just smile to someone's face and then stab them in the back the way my biological mother has, it's one of those, she didn't understand what she was doing. Edith, on the other hand, my Aunt Edith, she had been through that. She had, number one, seen how my biological mother was, having grown up with her. Number two, she had known multiple sides of things. Her first husband was very similar to my now dead ex-husband in a variety of ways. And where Anna, my biological mother, took my dead ex-husband's side when he was alive and even after his death, my Aunt Edith, even though she and I didn't speak about it, she could very much see certain traits that she recognized from when she was in the first marriage she was in. And the one thing that I personally had an issue with, that's a whole other ball of wax, has to do with the fact that she had to denounce everything in regards to being able to marry her second husband, Mark, to be able to do so in a Catholic church. And while I understand certain aspects, the other aspects of, in reference to like her two daughters, was where it was that seems like a problem in that regard for children when growing up. And I was told about that before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 by Kate and Allie. That's her two daughters from the first marriage. And so Kate had told me her mom had to stand up in front of the congregation and denounce everything. And I understand certain aspects, like I understand testimony, I understand the reasoning behind that. There are other things, on the other hand, that I do not understand. In the reference point of the denouncing of the prior, I understand that to a degree. It is when the aspects are of denouncing the children. That, children don't understand things the exact same way as adults do. So if remarrying when your children are an adult, that's one thing because you're able to explain things to them. Whereas when you're remarrying where your children are still children, that can cause certain issues, I would guesstimate. And so that was my personal contention in that regard. However, her second husband, he didn't really like certain aspects about my personality. For example, how blunt and to the point I have been. And all. And then, whatchamacallit, when going up to Illinois for the first time after my son was born with my now dead ex-husband, I tried warning my now dead ex-husband in reference to how certain things were. Like, anybody who's ever introduced somebody to their family, they kind of give them like, hey, you know, this person is like this or whatever. So for a better example in certain regards, when it came to introducing my now ex-boyfriend before winding up in Washington State to people who are like family, my aspect was, so the guy who is like the head of household there, don't piss him off. That was my warning. Was just don't piss him off. As far as like the wife at the time, it was, she's very critical, so if you are rude, she will call you out on it. As far as the current wife in that regard, you know, she's very kind, but don't piss her off. And then see a theme. And then the other male that's involved with the household, you know, he's very laid back, just don't piss him off. And so the guy, not my now ex-boyfriend before winding up in Washington State and that whole thing, or now ex-boyfriend, but then that whole thing, was just, well, they can't be that, like, difficult. And it's like, no, it's not that they're difficult. It's just don't piss them off. Because if you offend them, I'm going to have a problem. And I'm just letting you know, like, that's how that goes. And so he was just, well, why do I have to meet them anyway? Well, because you have to. Like, it is important at this point in time. And well, what's the big deal if I do or don't? It's like, I have to, like, I have to tell them certain things. I have to, you know, update them on certain things. And then when I got there with him, as well as my son, because I was finally able to introduce them to, then there was a problem. And I didn't get to discuss certain things, and because it was the focus of making sure that they were okay. And so that was what it was. However, in reference to my now dead ex-husband, taking my son up to Illinois along with there, because obviously he was alive at the time, went up and said, you know, this is how Mike is, this is how Anna is, this is how Patricia is, you're going to meet these individuals as well, this is that. And so my Aunt Edith was basically able to see certain things from that point in time. I would guesstimate if she were to look back and notice certain aspects, she'd be like, yeah, so that is a massively huge problem in reference to my now dead ex-husband. Because even up in Illinois, just the first time, I mean, he was himself. So, and the aspects of it was very much noticed by specifically her and her husband, and then Edith's first two daughters, very much able to tell the difference between my personality from before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 in comparison to after. So when discussing things, would talk and all that sort of stuff. However, if certain aspects were said, they would see my response, I would guesstimate looking back now, in comparison to when they knew me before my head injury compared to after my head injury, and in a more specific way when my now dead ex-husband was there, and if he did certain things that would essentially, I'll just stop because I don't want to deal with that conversation, sort of thing. Like, instantly. And those who have been in situations like that, unfortunately, but you know what I'm talking about, where they could, I guess the term is abuser, can give you a look and you just don't want to deal with that afterwards, sort of thing. Okay. And so there's that aspect. Now going into reference to Anna in that regard, I would guesstimate that my biological mother's sister, Edith, to be specific, would be able to verify quite a few aspects of the way my biological mother was when growing up. Now, in reference to my ex-mother-in-law, Lydia with a Y, Evangelina, I don't know what her surname is, from the Dominican Republic, Nichols, who had married Grandpa Nichols. She had thought it would be a way to pay back the employees that she was working with at the M&M plant outside of Fort Worth, because she would bring her food in, and even though she put her name on it, people would take her food. And so she did this thing after, I think she told me about it, it's like 3 or 4 years, and she was tired of it, so she made 1 box of brownies with like 3 boxes of chocolate X-Lax. And then nobody stole her food after that. Like, she went to lunch, half of it was gone, and then nobody stole her food after that. However, she had issues with feminine products there as well. People would go into her locker, take her stuff without her permission. And then her way to do that was she put fiberglass inside of the pads and tampons. And so I had been told about this. And I look at her and I said, don't you think that that's wrong? Like, at all? And she said, well, that's what they get for doing that. I said, but there are other ways to do that without causing actual problems like that. And she was like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you are a spiritual individual who grew up the way you did. You know that there are ways to do certain things like that. And then her son, my now dead ex-husband, had done something. And I look over at him, and I look over at her, and I look over at him, I look over at her. And I said, you know how your son was when he was a child. You know what I am dealing with. And at that point, that was when she started telling my now dead ex-husband, you need to treat her better. You need to treat her better. You need to stop doing what you're doing. You need to treat her better because you need to treat her better. And my now dead ex-husband just brushed her off. I was like, no, it's no big deal. And she was like, no, you need to treat her better. Because we had that discussion, and she understood exactly what I meant. And so, unlike some of her other, like grandchildren, for example, from Mary Evangelina Nichols Osteen, they didn't necessarily understand those warnings that were given to my now dead ex-husband, their dead brothers, and their spiritual husband. And so, where some individuals, depending on what you believe spiritually, there are certain things that can occur, and that is what it is. So going into the WDW, or Whiskey Delta Whiskey, I had to defend myself again. During this time, it was actually during the first separation from my now dead ex-husband. And he had already shot my dog Dionysus, because my dog Dionysus, a mixed dog, he was Akita, Black Lab, and Chow mix. And he was extremely protective of my son, my daughter, and I. However, he didn't have to really protect my son or my daughter very much because I took care of that. However, when it came to protecting me, he was extremely protective when it came to my now dead ex-husband. And this was just before the final separation. And when my now dead ex-husband would go to attack me, Dionysus would show his teeth, the fur on the back of his neck would just stand up. Those who have seen chow dogs, for that sort of fur to stand up is very, very different. And so he had the black spots on his tongue the way Akitas do. Think of like a giraffe in certain regards. He had the black fur of like the black lab, and then the chow mix, he had very much of the mane around his neck, whereas the rest of his fur was more similar to the black lab. And so Dionysus, I named him, he would show his teeth and be ready, like instantly, if I was actually able to sleep and Dionysus was, which he was usually near me, if my now dead ex-husband walked in the room, he would stand up. I'd wake up, because those who have had dogs, you know what I'm talking about. Stand up, growl. And good morning, hello. And it was usually when my now dead ex-husband was in a very bad mood, which means, for those who understand that, I was about to get in trouble, whether or not it had anything to do with what he was angry about. And so, or upset, or it really didn't take much for that regard. Those who have been in abusive relationships, you know what I'm talking about. And so Dionysus would stand up, fur would raise, he'd start growling, and my now dead ex-husband hated that. Hated how protective Dionysus was. And so there were points in times where my now dead ex-husband went to go hit me, and Dionysus jumped up and just went to go bite him. That's what it was. And then he'd just stay at my feet. Well, that went on for quite some time. He was a great dog, sweet dog. I mean, didn't have to worry about him when it came to being around my son and my daughter, because he's a very patient dog. When it came to my son and my daughter, think of more in regards to the black lab personality. Very playful, very friendly, that sort of thing. However, those who know an Akita breed in specific, as well as a Chow breed, when my now dead ex-husband would come near in an aggressive way, dominant, Dionysus knew I was and the one and the only. And so Dionysus would just instantly, puff up his chest, his fur would stand up on the back of his neck, and so on and so forth. Well, there was a point in time I was taking a shower, and I said, open the kennel so that way I can give Dionysus a shower. Because Dionysus, like any other dog that I had, that were my dogs, I could just call them over to the shower, they'd come into the shower, and I'd clean them in the shower. They wouldn't fight it, I didn't have to pick them up, including Ganesh, including, just specifically Dionysus, though. And just put them in the shower and just start cleaning them. The detachable shower head, wash them and then dry them off. They'd go out, and then I'd finish my shower, no problem. And they'd go and lay down and stuff like that. I'm very CDO on cleanliness. Despite the way the organization stuff is, I do what I can. Anyway, Dionysus did not want to get out of the kennel. My now dead ex-husband was attacked. He showed me how he was bleeding, and he had brought to my attention, you have that saying. What in particular? If a dog bites and causes blood to occur, that you have to put it down. I said, yes, with the exception of if it's defending. There is that point. yes, once a dog gets the taste for blood, that is a truthful thing if it is just a wild dog. However, Dionysus does not like you. I only asked you to open the kennel and ask you to get him out of the kennel. She said, open the kennel and I can give Dionysus a shower. And my now dead ex-husband, well, you said this, you said that, look, he made me bleed. And my now dead ex-husband admitted he put his hands inside of my dog's kennel and went to grab my dog by the collar, knowing my dog did not like him and was extremely protective of me. And it got to the point where, before this happened, Dionysus would stay by the door anytime I would go anywhere. So if I went to go to an appointment, take my children to school, go get groceries, so on and so forth, Dionysus would remain by the door and not leave the door until I came back to the house. The only time he would not be by the door is if he was in the kennel, or if my now dead ex-husband was feeding the other dogs. That upset my now dead ex-husband so much. You can think of like Mary Evangelina Nichols Osteen and All Dogs Love Me sort of garbage. And so it was one of those, I tried defending to prevent that from happening, and the end of that is my now dead ex-husband took my dog out to the backyard and used a 22 in front of my biological father to put my dog down. Anna, my biological mother, agreed that, oh, well, any dog that doesn't like, my now dead ex-husband, then she didn't like any dog like that. Any dog that had issues with me, then those, like her dog Dakota, and that included with my children, that was what she was into. And so Mike stood next to my now dead ex-husband as he used a 22 at point blank range and had to shoot twice. Had a whole bunch of other firearms that he could have used. If he actually cared, if he was actually humane, my now dead ex-husband would have used any other one, if you really think about it. Even the baby Desert Eagle had a higher caliber than a 22. And so my biological father stood by and watched it, and my now dead ex-husband laughed about it. He did what he did. I couldn't handle it. And so my children were taking a nap. My biological mother said she'd watch them. I went over to a store that I used to go to called Crystal Mountain, and I was just a wreck. I was so upset, and the people there, and that includes my Reiki teacher, who I got my attunements from, was there, and a couple other individuals, and they were just like, "Are you kidding me?" I'm like, "No, he was." My dog was defending me, and like any other time, and the one time trying to get a shower and stuff like that whole thing, and that was what it was. He also did that with several cats that I had gotten, because the cats did not like him. So it was, I dealt with the conversations after that occurred. I had a cat named Isis, a white cat. And because Isis liked my son, my daughter, and I, but did not like my now dead ex-husband, I didn't get to keep that cat. I had to watch that. That was my punishment. In what was explained to me before he took the cat afterwards. And that happened with a few others. And my now dead ex-husband, the knife that he used on my cats, with their blood and fur still on them, put it to my throat. After a couple conversations. And so was not allowed to discuss that at those times. So when it came to defending my children and keeping them safe another time, my now dead ex-husband brought up his dogs on his way to go to the lab. This was during the first separation. And I was enraged. And he had already hit me a few times in that conversation. And then I bucked up. And I said, I'm going to make some Chinese food because you obviously do not care in this regard, this regard, this regard, this regard. And this was in the backyard because I had already dealt with certain things inside the house. I got my children to their rooms. They were safe. And then my now dead ex-husband coming at me, yelling at me. He went outside of the backyard, came at me again. And then he brought up his dogs, Nick and Princess. I said, I will make some Chinese food. And I will do it in the way that you won't even know. And you've seen how I've already, tested my own training. I can get them to go into the oven. Because of the way I had trained them, I could tap on the kennel and they'd run in. And I was like, oh, that is awesome. One day I was cooking. It's like, what would happen? Just to see. And they did. They tried to get into the oven. I was like, okay, I can't do that again. That is what it is. However, during that fury, that came out of my mouth. And whereas my now dead ex-husband didn't care about any other aspect, then that would be when he bull rushed me and hit me in my hip to go airborne and land on the concrete path on my head, then my back, then my butt, and then my feet. Because he cared more about his dogs than he did about my son, my daughter, which his biological children, and I. And so he didn't care about that. And so he left me there for hours. Came back only because the guy in the lab that he was friends with had made him go back to the house to check on me. I found that out later. When lying in the backyard, it was summertime, I know that. So I was out just in the middle of the pathway. It was a concrete path. One part came out of the middle of the patio, the other part came out of the other side of the patio, whereas the other side had the bushes. My biological parents showed up to my house. Unannounced, didn't call, didn't ask, just were showing up. And my now dead ex-husband pulls into the driveway, speaks with them. Anna says, well, she's already, she's already disowned from the family again because, she doesn't want to be in a marriage with you. So whatever you do to her is whatever you do to her. That was what my biological mother said. My biological father said he would have thrown me off of a balcony to my now dead ex-husband. Then just during the initial separation. And so learned about that, not just because my now dead ex-husband told me that, but even they admitted to that. They even told me, as well as him when that situation was going on, that I was not allowed to take my maiden name back. Because according to them, I had disgraced their family name. Because I didn't want to be in an abusive marriage. That's how I disgraced their name. And so, after they talked outside, they left. He came over to where I was still laying unconscious, by the way, on the concrete path, however many hours. The way he got me to wake up was by sitting on my chest and yelling at me and then slapping me in my face. And when I opened my eyes, all I could see were stars and little birds just circling over my head. And then I had to crawl inside of my house. Though that was not the first time that had happened. There had been multiple times where that had happened. And whether it was from a conversation or whether it was because of, I was in charge of taking care of my house. I wanted a house, so I did the lawn mowing, I did the trimming of the hedges, I had done all of the gardening as far as the plants that I wanted in there, so on and so forth. And he would never, simply bring out a glass of water, knowing that I would forget. He would watch while he had a beer in his hand, speaking with the neighbors or whatever. And there were times where I had finished getting everything done as quick as I could. It was 1/3 of an acre for that particular backyard and front yard. It was a corner of a cul-de-sac, so it was larger. And after I finished the front yard and then the backyard, after trimming the hedges and all that sort of stuff, I learned I couldn't do gardening in the daytime. That's what I learned. I learned in the state of Texas to do the mowing of the lawn and the trimming of the hedges either really early in the morning or really late in the just before evening hours. And then any gardening I wanted to do, I did at night. Because nobody was ever going to take care of me. That's what I learned from that. And so several times I wound up actually having to crawl in to my house because of whatever occurred as far as that's concerned. And so, it wasn't that my biological mother and biological father didn't know. They joked with him in my house, thinking that was funny. Now, conversely, later, after my now dead ex-husband died, my biological father said, well, if I knew that, I wouldn't have been this way. And I looked at him, I said, but you did. You knew that. He said, well, Robert, meaning my now dead ex-husband, was convincing. I said, yes, but I also told you. And you told me that I was overreacting for what I was going through. Don't really think that's overreacting. So, fast forwarding in regards to after a whole bunch of stuff as far as my daughter and doing what I could there, I had gotten to the point where I was like, I'm going to change my legal last name because I don't want that last name. I only had kept it because of certain things, and then I was like, oh, I still have to because of making sure in regards to my son and my daughter. And so I'd actually gone to a lawyer, paid the fees and all that sort of stuff to be able to change my legal last name. And then after I had decided, well, I can't right now, then I found out about the identity theft issues, and then it was just, well, I just can't. I have to fix all of that now. Fantastic. I really don't have patience for that, but okay, fine. And so, but at that time when speaking with the lawyer, it was one of those, well, what do I want my last name to be? I can't take my maiden name back because obviously that's an issue. As far as my children's name, well, don't want that reminder as far as that's concerned with every legal document. And then the identity theft issues and having to file a police report and all that. Well, if I ever wind up getting married, I guess I'll do that then, because I don't want to deal with all this sort of stuff all repeatedly because of that. So, if I ever wind up getting married, I'll just do it that way. Not knowing at the time, in 2013, 2013, of the ability to do assumed names, but I don't really it's acceptable. I get it. It's just one of those. So when it came to writing my books, it's like, well, I'll just go by the name I've been going by for years, because that's why I created the email address that I can't get into in reference of Gmail, is it was during the first separation. And I had already been told by my biological parents I was not allowed to take my maiden name back, according to them. I was not allowed to do this. I was not allowed to do that. And so when I created my original email account through Gmail, it was, well, I'll do that because that's all I have. And in certain regards, I could almost feel like my great-grandfather was extremely proud of me in that moment. Which is an infuriation, because I've been having issues trying to get back into that email account. That is what it is. Nonetheless, it was the reason why. So, after, that particular situation where I crawled back into the house after being unconscious for however long, heard my children starting to wake up, so I had to go take care of them, make sure everything was okay. My now dead ex-husband then had, did some stuff around the house, and then, that was what it was. As far as the next one, well, I guess I already went over 22. So then, then there's that, and the irony is, during the first separation, which was shortly after what occurred in reference to my dog Dionysus, my now dead ex-husband, then first time separation, before the final separation, before his death, he was cleaning a 22, and when I was with the Jade Wolf Coven at the time, got a phone call, and my biological mother told, I don't remember whether it was Jamie or Christine, that she needed to speak with me. She told me that my now dead ex-husband, then first time separation husband, before the final separation, before his death, he had shot himself. And it was an accident because he was cleaning the firearm and he didn't know that it was loaded. And a former, supposedly, Army Ranger, not knowing that a firearm is loaded when cleaning it, and it didn't seem right. So I went over, I picked him up, because I had to, ish. And, when he told me about that, I didn't believe him, and I did. I put my finger in that wound, because he had done what he had done. My biological mother didn't see a big deal about it. My biological father, which I was really surprised in this regard, he actually believed the aspects that my now dead ex-husband had said in reference to he didn't know that the 22 was loaded. And so my now dead ex-husband, then for separation, before the final separation, before his death, had told me before, I was like, I don't ever want you to do that, and again, and so on and so forth. He had said, don't you feel like you should come back to me? No, I don't. No, not at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. Why would you think that I would want to do that? And he said, well, the doctors said that it was close to vital organs. I looked at him, I said, well, didn't you originally look at going into being a cardiothoracic surgeon? And he said, yeah. I said, well, so you've studied where the different organs are in the human body? And he said, yeah. I said, okay. And I'm supposed to believe that you didn't do that for attention. And he looked at me and he goes, you just don't care about me. You are correct. I do not. I do not. At all. You prefer to go off of Machiavellian standards. I do not. At all. I don't believe that Machiavelli had it correct. There were certain points, yes, I understood his military aspects. However, that is not how you have a relationship. And that is what you prefer. That is what you are going to, continue. I don't have patience for that. I believe that there is a balance aspect of certain points of what he wrote about. However, the way you do it is not the way it should be done. And my now dead ex-husband, then first time separated, blah, 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 blah. He had thrown a temper tantrum because he said I didn't care about him. And again, he was correct. He knew I didn't want to be in the marriage to begin with. He knew that. And so, him telling me this aspect in regards to the other things, it was just one of those, I don't care. Well, he had admitted that to my biological mother and biological father over time. He had admitted that he had shot himself on purpose. And Anna, my biological mother, had said, are you kidding me? You're going to console that. That is who you are going to console. Not your own, not, you're going to, I hope so much for you, Anna. And she just looked over at me when I said that, and she said, I know you do. And I looked at her and I was like, I don't think you understand what I'm hoping for you taking his side. And, oh, you're just so overdramatic. No, I'm not. I am not overdramatic. Realistically, I am so calm comparison to what I could be. I prefer you just believe me. How are you going to believe him instead of me? Her response was, well, he's in college. He's about to get his PhD. You're you. Well, it's really no different than when growing up in New Jersey, right? And she looked at me and she goes, well, yeah, but, you didn't have a college degree back then either. I was a child? Like, I mean, really, what is wrong with you? A lot is the answer to that rhetorical question, in my opinion. Nonetheless, everyone took his side that I knew when he was alive. He had gotten his family to completely hate me. He had gotten a bunch of the individuals throughout the neighborhood to absolutely hate me at the time until they learned other stuff. And he had just continued on with that. And obviously his family, with the exception, ironically, of his mom and dad. His mom and dad, Grandma and Grandpa Nichols, ironically cared more about me than they cared about what garbage he was spewing. And it was just one of those, well, fantastic. That's great. However, the rest of my ex-in-laws at that time were taking his side, and it was just one of those, I really, is what it is. So I did what I could, as best as I could, despite the amount of conversations I dealt with. So tired of that. The irony is the first relationship I had-ish after the first separation was with a guy named Thomas Marston. And he had said his dream was like all these different things. And I said, yeah, that's not acceptable. And then he said, I wish I could find a female who would be a geisha. And I looked at him, I said, you're looking at the wrong female, because I will fight you back. And if I have to fight you back, I guarantee you, you're not gonna like that response. And so I had actually told my now dead ex-husband at that time first separation aspect, and he actually got infuriated. And by that time, depending what you believe, as far as religion and spirituality, he had already made 2 of the 5 packs. And so that is what it is on that regard. However, my now dead ex-husband, then the first separation, had gone over to Thomas Marston's grandparents, or grandfather and mother's house, and had essentially hid in a tree, and then also had left a voicemail on their answering machine saying that I had done all these things to him, and then blamed their son and grandson for all these other things. So at the point when Thomas Marston and I were about to go to an event during the first separation, instead of going initially, went back over to his grandfather and mom's house, and I apologized because I didn't know that that was going to occur. And the mom just kind of looked at me and she was like, are you really apologizing for that? Well, because he shouldn't have done that. And she understood. She very much saw certain things, and she was like, okay, you do not understand. And after that, the grandfather, who was retired Air Force, and I would talk for hours because Thomas Marston was taking longer than a female to get ready. Realistically, I'd show up, and then he'd just start getting ready. So think of a female, when she starts getting ready initially, and going and doing the whole makeup thing, the average female, not all females, but the average female. And so 4 hours later, I'm still talking with the grandfather, and then, Thomas Marsden comes down the stairs, and he's like, the patio stairs to come outside, and I'm talking with the grandfather, and the grandfather and I look over, and Thomas Marsden, well, are you ready to go? And it's like, well, you only took 4 hours to get ready. I mean, you're lucky your grandfather was here for me to speak with, because I was ready to leave, after the first half hour. So, grandfather laughed at that. He was just like, you tell him, mama. It was just like, I don't know how you do it. Well, at the end of the time in regards to the relationship with Thomas Marston, the grandfather had actually kicked him out of the house. And Thomas Marsden showed up to my house. This was shortly before the end of my time with the Jake Wolf Coven. And he was like, you need to let me stay in your apartment. I was like, I don't need to let you do shit. I don't know who you think I am, but no, I don't have to do anything in that regard. And, well, look, and, if you cared about me, because he yelled at my children once. I was like, I don't know who you think you're talking to. However, no. You're lucky in the regard that I have self-control, because I just told you to get out of my apartment and not, do that. If I didn't have self-control and I did what was going on in my thoughts, well, I'll just leave it at that. And so then Thomas Marsden threw a fit, and he was like, well, I'm going to go to Mr. Charles's house because I can get him to do whatever I want. So you're mad because you can't get me to do whatever you want? Yes. Well, that's a problem for you and not for me. That's what that is. Thomas Marsden had also been the individual who had introduced Christine of the Jade Wolf Coven into the community in San Antonio. And, whatchamacallit, he had gotten her to orgasm a bunch of times, the whole thing. And, Christine was just so proud of that. And I looked over at her, I'm like, whatever it is that you're into. And so after a few things, because of how Thomas Marsden was, I was like, well, I'll just step back from the community, because at this point, it's not that I was fully involved realistically. I was only going to classes and demonstrations to watch and to learn and to see where I fit in regards to not just the community, but more so in reference to myself and my own life. And so, this particular time of Thomas Marsden and Christine of the Jade Wolf Coven throwing their fits, it's actually ideal, because I don't feel comfortable yet to step forward and do what I feel like doing. And there were several instances at some of the events and classes and demos, mainly classes and demos, where it realistically pissed off Thomas Marsden, because I would pick up a tool after getting permission and be able to watch a couple times, talk with the teacher a few minutes, pick up the tool and use it perfectly. And the teachers were just, oh, okay, well, Thomas Marsden threw a fit, and then, so there was a single tail that I had picked up, and cracked it in the first swing. And the teacher's like, oh, okay. And I got it right on the spot that I was looking at hitting. And he was just, oh my God, you just did that. And I look at him, I'm like, well, it is what it is. And so I asked a few other questions in reference to the differences between the leather that was for one of his whips in comparison to another whip, and so on and so forth. Well, Thomas Marsden threw a titty baby temper tantrum. Yeah, you need to be, why are you paying attention to her instead of me? Blah, blah, look, I can do this too. And then he smacked himself in the face with the whip. And, the guy and I, the teacher and I, just started laughing. And I asked the teacher, how many times does that happen? And he goes, a lot more than that's cool. Sucks for them. And, is what it is. And so, we talked about it a few times, and it just was what it was. And so I'll end on the particular story of Lonely in that regard. On that page, I'll flip it over so that way you get the last portions of it. So my biological sister had moved from Illinois down to the state of Texas because my biological parents had said that they were moving from Illinois to Texas because they wanted to be able to be more involved with my son and my daughter's life instead of telling me the truth, realistically. And so Patricia was as she was. I already knew that she was not able to blame me the way she had when growing up. So I had joined the Army, and I already had my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000 by that time. And so they moved to Texas. Mike showed up, found a house, put it on a bridge loan, and then they were selling the house in Illinois while that was going on. And Patricia wound up staying in my house at the time. First week of school, she wound up having a threesome with some people in her class. I had spoken with the mom of one of the males. We talked for hours. She's a very sweet woman, and she very much understood what was going on. And then she asked about me, and I told her about my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, and she was like, oh my God. And I was like, so is everything okay? And she's like, oh, okay, no, okay. And so we talked for a while. And then afterwards, I had grounded Patricia for, because it was one of those, I can't deal with certain things. I've got to, take care of stuff, and you need to be reprimanded for what you did. And all she had to do was tell me the truth. If she really wanted to do that, it was one of those, get protection, just tell me the truth. You don't have to lie. And she kept pushing the curfew, so on and so forth. Called Mike and Anna in Illinois to tell them she wasn't going to be at my house. Went in the state of Texas for the curfew sort of thing. That did not, yeah. And so went over to the house in San Antonio that my biological parents bought, and that's where 3 cars were and 3 separate sets of feet that were showing through the garage door that was open. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. And a particular fragrance of smoke that was coming out from the bottom of the door that I didn't know what it was at that time. And then I learned that would be pot. And so it was what it was. And so she had to deal with that. Well, after about a couple of weeks, maybe a month, she had wanted to know if I would allow some of her friends to come over to the house to watch movies. Let that happen real quick the weekend of that threesome that she had. Instead of leaving her at my house in San Antonio, she wound up going with us to Fort Worth. And that was when she met my ex-sister-in-law now, Susie Marie Nichols Lopez, and they got along so well. And so that is what it is. And so I was actually told, why can't Susan be more like you, in reference to Susie Marie Nichols Lopez? I would actually get along with her if she was more like you. It's like, fine. So the 2 males, 1 female came over. They were watching whatever movies, and then they went outside. I was taking care of my son and my daughter, the house. My now dead ex-husband was sleeping. And so I went to go downstairs to go outside on the patio to have a cigarette. And I see these balls of flame, and I'm like, what is going on? Well, one of the boys who had hair that was about shoulder length with like this one streak of like, it wasn't like a thin streak, it was like a big chunk of hair that was, bleached. And he was taking a can of hairspray, lighting it on fire, and aiming it at my house, as well as the 2 other teenagers and my biological sister when I walked outside. And then he aimed it at me, and multiple times I've done prior videos in reference to this particular situation, pushed the flame out of the way, stopped the flames from going to the other kids and stuff like that. He wouldn't stop. I went upstairs, opened up the Gamma 3 gun safe, popped it open, got the, I think it was a Glock. I think it was the Glock. I think it was. Either that or it was the baby Desert Eagle. It was one or the other. And went downstairs very calmly. The ironic thing is my hands were not as shaky and twitchy as normal, which I had noticed afterwards. Nonetheless, walked down the stairs, and I tell the boy, you better stop it. And he wouldn't do it. He aimed it at my house again, aimed it at me again, and then I just put the firearm up barrel to his head. You're going to stop right now. And then he put the hairspray down and the lighter down, and he called me a bunch of names, and I was like, is it really wise for you to do that while I have a firearm to the side of your skull to run your mouth that way? I have bad aim when it comes to targets. However, I don't think I'm going to miss it point blank. And the boy just, oh, you're so crazy. It's like, you are attempting to burn my house down with my son and my daughter in it. You have sprayed, and the firearm was to the side of his head this whole time. Now, you do this, and you have tried to get these, teenagers on fire. You've aimed it at my fence line between my fence line with my house and my neighbor, and that is an older fence, and so you are putting my entire neighborhood at risk. I don't care. So now that you've put that down, you are going to leave. Otherwise, I'm going to pull the trigger. And it is what it is. And the two other teenagers were like, so we're going to leave. Good. They stayed around a little bit longer to speak, and then they were out. However, the boy said, I'm going to tell my dad on you. Okay. Why do I care? Because he's in the police force. So he's probably going to tell you aiming fire in the ways that you did was your fault, and I have the right to defend myself, my house, my property, my son, my daughter, as well as all of my neighbors from the fire that you want to start. As well as those three. And Patricia, my biological sister, oh, Susan, you're so overdramatic. Did you really have to do that? Did he finally put the freaking lighter and the can of hairspray down? Okay. Yeah, he did. Okay. For you moving from Illinois to the state of Texas to help me take care of my son and my daughter, that's kind of, don't you think? And she just threw a fit. The other three left. I didn't ever get a visit from the police officer that he claimed that his dad was, and it was one of those. At this point, I wish I pulled the trigger. However, I didn't. I got in trouble for taking the firearm out of the gun safe. Dealt with that because I had cocked it, so I guess that was the baby Desert Eagle. And so, yes, because that was after my now dead ex-husband lost the Glock 45 on the roof of the car at the gas station. It was the white Dodge Grand Caravan at the Walmart gas station that he put the black leather-bound concealed handgun thing. And that whole thing. And I had to get out of the car to go and look for something black in the dark, not being told what it was, after he had driven all the way to Austin and then back from Georgetown. And whatchamacallit, I had heard it on the roof of the car, or the roof of the van. I didn't know that's what it was. And I had asked, I said, don't you think you should stop for whatever that noise was? And my now dead ex-husband then said, it's no big deal, it's nothing important. And I said, I have a feeling it was something important, I don't know what it was. Well, it wound up being that Glock 45 with a couple of magazines in it. And, excuse me, and I dealt with conversations until he would call the Georgetown police, which I actually had to dial the number to get that to occur, to be able to report that, because I was afraid of it being found and used. And my now dead ex-husband, then he said, oh, it's no big deal. No, are you kidding me? This is the state of Texas. What is wrong with you? What, why would you? And his thing was, well, why do you care? You made me get a bunch of gun safes. And no. I purchased the gun safes. I purchased the gun locks. I didn't make you because you didn't do it. So I did it. Well, you went all New Jersey gun laws on me because you wouldn't get one gun safe. All I had to do is get one. So, yes, I did. However, That was for a multifaceted aspect. So why do you care if somebody in the state of Texas finds it? I care if a child finds it. I care if somebody gets hurt because of them not knowing what it is. I am all for the Second Amendment. However, you have to be a responsible firearm owner, which you are obviously not. And dealt with conversation. And then, gave the phone over to, after dialing the Georgetown police number. And then I wound up dealing with a conversation because they passed him around. And because I doubt, and I even said this back then, I said, I doubt that they believed it initially. I doubt that they were like, oh yeah, somebody just put a firearm on the roof of the car in a black leather, concealed thing. And I don't know if he actually told them that fullness of it. Nonetheless, was what it was. So going back to my biological sister, and that whole thing in reference to the threesome that she had in our biological parents' bed in San Antonio the first week of her high school in San Antonio, so don't tell me there's no pattern of behavior there in regards to why they moved from the state of Illinois to the state of Texas. Just saying, when Mike and Anna finished selling the house in Illinois, moved to Texas officially, they picked up Patricia and Anna's dog Dakota. They went to their house, and then they came back, and they come up to me and they're like, we need to have a sit down. Okay. Let's go outside onto my back patio that had an octagon-shaped table or a hexagon-shaped table that I had found and picked up for that. Anyway, not for that, but for my back patio. And so everybody sat down in their chair. I had my chair that I normally sat in, which had my back against the wall, or technically the window. And Mike had said, well, everybody go around and say what you have to say. And Patricia blamed me. And my now dead ex-husband said, well, I only know this, that, and the other. And he defended Patricia, is what it is. And then Anna blamed me, saying that if it wasn't for me giving my then husband a hug in my house in front of Patricia, she would not have felt so lonely that she needed to have a threesome in their bed. If I wasn't so rude as to give my then husband a hug, not a kiss, not like all sorts of actual that, if I hadn't just given him a hug, she would not have felt the need to have a threesome in their bed. I refused back then, just as I refuse now, to take blame for that. Because I brought up the pattern of behavior aspect, and no. Patricia's going to go somewhere. She's going to go to college, and she does her professional point, blah, 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 and you're just you. You had to go and fight to join the army, and where'd that get you? It got you a head injury, and you're not going to do anything worthwhile. Thanks, I guess. So my son and my daughter, which are of importance to me, think that, okay. And at that time, I hadn't gotten into scuba diving, but by that time, I had been studying quite a few spiritual books. I had already read my now dead ex-husband's college textbooks after already having read the books that, Mike had when I was growing up in New Jersey. I had already finished reading the encyclopedia that I had bought for my children and did a whole bunch of other things, not forgetting my garden at my house, the remodeling I had done as far as the interior design, so on and so forth. But I'm not going to do anything worthwhile, according to her. That doesn't even go into the day of 9/11 and, all the stuff that I had made suggestions in reference of. And since then. But according to my biological mother, I was never going to amount to anything worthwhile, which kind of is what it is. Nonetheless, what was I going to do that was going to be of anything noteworthy? What was I going to do that would be of anything compared to Patricia? Because Patricia, I mean, she's going to go to college, and I didn't, finish that. And I had to go and join the army. I had to fight to join the army. How dare I have my patriotism? How dare I do this? How dare I do that? And it was one of those, yeah, and I'm not even gonna, and I just sat back in my chair listening to it. I'm just like, okay, light up another cigarette. Go ahead, tell me. You remember how, and at one point I had said to Anna, I said, you remember how you said that you thought that the army was just a phase for me? And she said, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I said, yeah. You remember how I told you why I had wanted to join the military? Yeah, you did this, you did that, and that's why I, moved to Illinois. Okay, you remember how I had been upset about getting into MAST, and I didn't get into MAST because I couldn't start my military career sooner? Yes, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Do you remember what my nightmare was that I told you about that turned into a dream? Yeah, you said something about where there was an explosion at the bottom of the World Trade Center and then a bunch of airplanes. See any correlation about, like, do you remember what the rest of the nightmare was? Yeah, you said there were airplanes all over. It was all sorts. You saw like a map of like the world and like all these buildings all over the place that you had never seen, never been to, never da. What's the big deal? You had to go and join the army. What's the big deal? You did this, you did that. What are you gonna amount to? So there was, not to make light of it, however, there was only the airplanes that went into a couple of buildings in comparison to my nightmare. Yeah, what does that have to do with anything? Never mind. You obviously don't care. Well, maybe if you went to college, you'd be worth something. But otherwise, nothing that you do is worthwhile to me or to your sister or to your father. So you don't enjoy your life. Okay. Whatever. That's whatever it is, it is. Well, if you're going to take Patricia's side, I'm just going to let you know it wasn't because of me that she did that. And no, it is your fault that, she was lonely. It is your fault right now, meaning the 6th of June, 2020, in regards to what happened to the lack of assistance to my daughter, in turn my son, and in turn the few that I had been happy with, and why I am lonely now. Because if you had just let me live my life when I was happy, I wouldn't be alone. if you didn't mess with my Medal of Honor art project afterwards. The different individuals who got involved. I wouldn't be where I am now. And so while, yeah, okay, I've done a few things since then, it is what it is. I was not to blame back then, just like I am not to blame now. Despite how many individuals have blamed me for things that I was not responsible for. And yet the things that I was responsible for was it the same sort of blame placed upon me in regards to, if I didn't go and do this, you wouldn't have felt the need to do that? How about just be better people? How about just be better in your own existences? How about actually raise people up and give them hope, instead of destroying the way my biological mother and biological sister did, as much as they did. Just saying, I actually enjoyed the friendships that I thought I had, with the exception of the issues that I dealt with in the other regards. I didn't lie to anybody. And so, in that particular aspect, I will end this particular official YouTube channel video. Comment, like, subscribe, share.